The clicking thingy for you to move on. Okay, now it's on. Thank you. Where's the good place? Good morning, everyone. Are you enjoying Kigali? Yes? Feel free to give us feedback, me, Norbert, all the Rwandans in the room. We want to have more of these things, so feedback is very welcome. Thank you for the introduction. I want to say a big thank you to CC Hub before I get started, not just for pulling this off, but last week they pulled off a corporate innovation retreat. Next week they're taking startups to Asia. They're continuously demonstrating their commitment to innovation, technology, and building our ecosystem in Africa. So big shout out to Bosun, Peter, Obo, and Tommy. I don't know, anyone else I missed? So great. I think coming out of yesterday, there were a lot of questions about our proof of concept strategy and what we're trying to do in Rwanda to build our innovation ecosystem. And so today I just wanted to give everyone a brief introduction on Kigali Innovation City, our plans for the ecosystem. Also take your feedback and if you see, invite you all to participate in what we're trying to build. So our broader mission is really to just nurture and accelerate our ecosystem here, but with a vision of becoming a Pan-African hub. We want to not just serve Rwandans, but we want to serve people who want to build businesses that can scale in Africa and beyond. There's two pieces of that. The first one is a real estate development. So if you look on the screen on the left-hand side, we have a 60-hectare development in the Kigali Special Economic Zone. So it's located right next to our manufacturing zone, which is about 70 hectares and has over 70 manufacturers operating there today. Today on site, we have Carnegie Mellon University. Their first class has moved into this campus this August. We're going to have other educational institutions. So the Africa Leadership University, which was started by Fred Swanica, where we'll have the Africa Institute of Math and Science, which is really trying to progress African mathematics and groom African mathematicians at the graduate level. And then we also our own University of Rwanda is building their own biomedical engineering campus, which will focus not just on biomedical engineering, but e-health. And this ties into our broader vision for healthcare in the country. In addition to the healthcare, the educational institutions, we want to attract more mature companies, but also startups, and make sure that we have the enabling environment and support system that they need. So everything from your accelerators, incubators, your shared services, design labs such as CC Hub, and so on. That will be in a mixed-use commercial space with retail. We also have housing and student housing and so on. So we're really trying to build an integrated city in Kigali. The vision is this becomes the testing ground. When we talk about our proof of concept, this is our testing ground for people who want to come, not just startups, but even mature companies looking to try new ideas and scale. The whole point of making sure it's integrated is to make sure that there's a lot more collaboration, because what we've seen is there's too many silos. Everyone wants to work in, if I'm a university, I want to work within my institution. If I'm the government, I'm working within the confines of my institution. So how do we start to really improve collaboration across all these key players in the ecosystem? We're starting small. We're starting to see I think some appetite, like our government's using hackathons now to try and disrupt how they do in public procurement, to find solutions where if there's no one on the market and there's a startup that can do it, work with them through that journey and see if they can create solutions. So how do we start to scale some of those collaborations? How do we start to bring in research and the universities and academia into it? And I think big focus on making sure we have great infrastructure, sustainability. Rwanda is pushing into electric vehicles. I'll touch on that later. How do we make sure that the city is demonstrating what we're trying to create for the whole of Rwanda? We've partnered with AfCFTA, which is a Pan-African infrastructure fund. So they are our partners in getting the rest of the project developed. So right now we have Carnegie Mellon, Africa Leadership University will start soon. But then for the rest of the campus, we're going to now start to develop the rest of that site. And this is just in terms of the talent that we're building. These are the universities that are set up, offering graduate programs, and they're all, a lot of them from CMU to ALU have at least 50% Rwandans. It's very diverse, so 50% Rwandans, 50% from the rest of Africa. So we're really trying to leverage that diversity that we have in Africa and bring that talent here in Rwanda. So feel free to, if you guys want to pursue programs here, if you know people, let them know. There's scholarship opportunities that are available for most, with Carnegie Mellon, with Africa Leadership University and AIMS. We also have Andela. They've started, and they're also training developers in Rwanda. And then yesterday there were a lot of questions on the proof of concept and our vision. So this started with, we keep getting a lot of interest in Rwanda with people who want to test new ideas. And we didn't have a structured way of dealing with it, but we also found that there was a lot of openness for people to try, especially on the government side, and Claire spoke a lot about that yesterday. There's, the government has proven that it's agile, it's willing to try new things, and that has attracted many people. So VW, for instance, when they launched the assembly plant, they decided they want to test mobility solutions. So not just Move, which many of you are using, but they also want to test something similar to Zip cars. They're also piloting electric vehicles, and they're planning to launch some either later this year or early next year. Ampersand is doing the same with electric motorbikes. They now have their first charging station in one of the, at a petrol station in one of the busiest areas in Kigali. So these are some of the proof of concept initiatives we have in place. What we're trying to do now is how do we institutionalize that? What does that path look like for someone who's coming in? How do we create the sandbox environment so that we're not having to do all the hand-holding every time people are coming in? And that's the path we're now on, and we're trying to lay what that looks like. What's the landing pad when you come here? What does that process look like? So when it came to, you can have a proof of concept in everything, but we also wanted to make sure it was targeted and it fit in with the priority sectors that we have in Rwanda. And priority sectors have two things. One, it's either you're driving economic growth, you're creating economic opportunity, or you're also addressing some of the challenges we still face when it comes to poverty and lifting people out and improving their lives. So agriculture is one space. 70% of our population in Rwanda is still employed in agriculture. There's still very low levels of productivity. It's a lot of smallholder farmers. How do we start to use technology to disrupt what's going on in agriculture? Like, right now it's really hot in Kigali. People are waiting for the rains in September. It's still very much rain-fed, low levels of irrigation use and so on. So how do we start to actually leapfrog the challenges we're facing? If you've seen our hills, it's very expensive to irrigate. What else can we do? So we've picked up what you see at the bottom are some of the subdomains that we're looking at to explore and see if there's, what are the possibilities for innovating across those domains. Healthcare, we've had a lot of improvements in terms of access and getting not just the hospitals, but health centers and community health workers, but we still have a lot to do when it comes to quality of healthcare. A lot of people still live far away from the nearest health center or the nearest district. How do we start to use technology to help them do that? Babylon Health, which we talked about, is already doing that, but there's still room for more in terms of remote diagnostics and making sure they're low cost. In prevention, there's still a lot that can be done for people in terms of integrating our IT systems. We have most of our hospitals have an information system, our district centers have an information system, but sometimes you find that they don't talk to each other. Or at the lowest level, which is the district center, they're not yet connected to the internet. And so when you map that patient journey and they go to the district center, and then next time they're sent to the hospital might not have their records on file. So how do we start to integrate those systems so that we can help people even give the patient that data on their phones, but also people can then start to use analytics and other technologies to really improve the quality of healthcare that we're delivering. And then financial services as well, because it ties into all of this, including with agriculture. Some of the cross-cutting domains which are also priorities are building our skills and capabilities in data and analytics. We don't think everyone needs to build their own capabilities. How do we start to actually attract people who can just do that across multiple sectors? Cybersecurity is key, and smart logistics. As you know, we're a landlocked country, but we also have a growing industry when it comes to drones and aviation. How do we start to leverage that to improve logistics, not just for Rwanda, but beyond? Yeah, I think I'll pause there, take questions, take feedback, ideas. For us, this is an iterative process. It's something we're constantly learning. So, and also just hear from you on how we can serve you better as people who, I see everyone in this room as our customers, people we want to come to Rwanda. We also want to make sure we're connected to the rest of Africa so that, if you start in Rwanda, I can tell you we can help you scale to Nigeria, South Africa, and so on, because we've built those networks to support you. So yeah, with that, I'll pause and take questions.
Thank you, Thessi. Questions, anyone? Comments?
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. My question is this what is happening or what you'll be doing?
It's a mix of both. So for the real estate, we will be building it, but we already have those institutions in place. So CMU has been here for many years, for 7 years now. They've had over 150 students graduate, go back to their countries. Some have stayed here. Africa Institute of Math and Science, they're already here. So the universities are already here. We're just giving them a place to go to. When it comes to companies, we have people who are, this year alone, Motorola has come in and they're going to provide IoT solutions. Kaspersky is coming in for cybersecurity. And those are more of the mature ones. VW came in last year. We have people at the startup stage. So we have people coming in. What we're trying to do is how do we ease that process, kind of almost replicate what RDB has done for business and investors more broadly, but now tailor it to to people who are at a much earlier stage require. I think the research to startup to corporate, like that linkage that's still very nascent, and so that is something we still have to be doing. People are doing it at, individual levels, but how do we start to create structure? There are countries where there's a framework for collaboration across academia, government, and private sector, and it's very clear. We don't have that yet. So some things are in flight, some things are very nascent, some things we are starting from scratch.
My question is about your outreach. How are you, of course we are aware of how Rwanda is repositioning itself as kind of a tech hub and also providing access to markets. My question is, it's kind of considered like a soft landing activity, but not just for Rwanda, for neighboring countries as well. And from my knowledge, this is very interesting for companies in North Africa. A lot of startups in North Africa, but also to my knowledge, this is not something that they're very much aware about. So do you have any plans or what is your outreach strategy? I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, that's something so one of it has been, how do we start to connect to different African countries, and so that instead of you trying to do it yourself, if I know that Meta is in Nairobi, Meta says, oh, we have a partner in Kigali if you're interested in the Kigali market, and vice versa, right? So building those connections. Second is using some of the more pan-African platforms that are in place, like Smart Africa is really doing a lot. And then the third is things like this, attending conferences, and because the outreach is not just for people here, it's also for beyond. So earlier this year we went to Silicon Valley, we've done a Japan trip, and some of these other places to just try to understand if you are a researcher doing something focused on Africa and you're based at a university in London or even if it's in another African country, how do we start to reach out to you so you know that you can actually come to Kigali and test it out? So we're trying to, there's threefold. I think the biggest one is how do we first connect to the networks that already exist so that we all start to feed each other. Then there's a Pan-African networks, and then lastly it's more targeted research, especially across these three areas. Where's the leading research being done? Who are the leading companies in this space? And then we reach out to them. That's a more targeted approach. Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
So my follow-up question again, because if you look at the tech market, for example, a lot of the industries that you did mention,
Yeah.
I'm referring to North Africa because this is what I know a lot of.
Yes.
I know I'm very aware of what's happening.
What's up?
You guys know about Swim?
No. You want to tell us?
Startup, and they're kind of competing with Uber right now, and they just expanded to Nigeria and Lagos, and they're doing really great. They're incredible, and there are so many cases, stories like that we can do, and vice versa as well. Like, oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. So I'm just really. I see this as a great opportunity, and I can also see, like, I'm happy to discuss it even further. How can we promote this more further within the startup ecosystem? Or I'm talking about like medium companies that have been operational for 5 years, and they almost reached their market share in the region, and unfortunately now they're seeking to expand to Europe.
Why unfortunately?
Because there is much more opportunity within the continent, I believe. I'm just saying that it's a missed opportunity and the only reason they're not going to Africa is because of access. It is not because there is not a market, it's just because there's no access for them. And I would really love to see how can we work to eradicate that, because
Thanks. Could you share more about government's process in procuring from entrepreneurs in establishing this? And maybe just to give some context. So, I mean, with us, we have quite a rigorous tender process in South Africa, which is a killer for the entrepreneur. There are more policies now in making sure that to shorten payment process. And we're having now conversations about how tech hubs, or at least Chimolokong, can be a clearance house for entrepreneurs. So I'd just like to know more about that, because on the other side, you don't want to short circuit too much because of our issues around corruption.
Yeah, so the first thing they've done, and this is still very much in the early stages, we don't really have a framework yet, but the first pilots have been for things that, especially in the tech industry, where they're looking for new systems or new apps to be built, they'll have hackathons. Whoever wins the hackathon, they'll give them some money, and then there will be milestones for them to hit, and they'll work with them. But it started with very small things. One has been in IoT, and one has been in just like website. I think it was consolidating all the websites for government institutions. What we're trying to look at now is how do we scale that for especially in places where government's already spending money. Like if you're spending X amount on textbooks, is there room for us to move some of that money for some ed tech applications that might actually scale better, and you can actually update and instead of having, because a textbook is very, what's the word? It's like, one, it's analog, but it's also very static. You can have dynamic content in another way. The challenge is, you also have to realize that for a government agency to dedicate its budget to a startup, if something goes wrong, it's even the corporates have said that as well, if something goes wrong, they're accountable to someone. So one of the ideas we've been trying to look at is, do you have some sort of insurance scheme or some way to pay them back if something goes wrong and get that funding in place? Kind of like what the World Bank used to do for political risk assurance, when insurance for markets back in the day. So it's something similar, but it's still very much a work in progress. We've tried to use the hackathons as like, this is a proof point that this can work. But it's still, I think, for disrupting traditional procurement, where a lot of money is being spent, that one's a much longer process, yeah. In healthcare, though, they've been a lot more receptive. I think because of the scale of the problems you face and the amount of money you have, they're constantly looking for new ways to make their money work for them. Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for the presentation. I wanted to check what incentives you have for people coming into the Innovation Hub. So are there any tax incentives for companies establishing there, or is it just for the benefit of being in the Innovation Hub as opposed to another place in Kigali?
So traditionally, we've had tax incentives for large ICT companies. So it was if you're investing over 50 million, you had certain incentives with fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. What we've realized now is that that is changing. You can, especially if it's a software project, you can't ask someone to invest 50 million on the onset. So that's a process we're now looking at like what are the incentives, what is the journey for a startup that we will put in place. So by the time the city's up and running, there will be incentives, but we're not trying to give incentives for the sake of giving incentives, because there's also leakages in the tax system. So how do we actually make sure they're tailored to how do we make sure they're effective? So that's something we're currently in the process of studying, including seeing how is this market competitive versus other markets, but also how do you make sure you're helping them succeed as opposed to, charging them tax in the first month of business and they're not even earning a revenue. So that's still work in progress.
If there are no other questions. Thank you, Thessi. There's a round of, Femi, you had your hand.
So my question is, and I think it echoes one of the questions from yesterday, how early is too early for the ventures that come to proof here? And then what's the support to come?
That's a good question. I think the support system, so right now we just leverage, here's the existing assets on their market, but in terms of for early stage seed financing, let's say research projects, there's a National Research and Innovation Fund that has been put in place. So if you have a great proposal and you have a partner to implement it with, they have some money that's available for that, both for research and both for innovation. So that was put in place last year. At the growth stage, then we now have a Rwanda Innovation Fund, which is where the anchor LP, there'll be other private LPs, there's a fund manager, and they'll be funding not just, and that's the one Claire was speaking about where we have the support from AFDB. So they'll be funding not just Rwandan companies, but East African and Pan-African companies. That's the mission that they have. Where we're still filling that gap, and that's part of why we've put ecosystem development as part of our is the in-between. Because that's where we found that they might just be the co-working spaces, physical space is not enough. That's where the tax incentives come in play, not even incentives, just like what does the tax process look like? Are you delaying when they have to pay VAT and so on? So that's the part we're still figuring out, even in terms of seed financing, building our own angel network, training our angels, getting some of the development banks and the donors in on this to maybe provide matching funds. That's the part that we're making sure there will be something available, because we found there's like a missing middle almost, yeah.
So Tessie, one more question.
Morning, thank you very much. My question is basically around something I heard yesterday and that you're corroborating this morning. The fact that you're looking to be the test bed. One of the steps I think I heard yesterday that was mentioned was you do not mind as a country to tweak your existing regulations just to assist that process. Now, my question is, what are the mechanisms here that you use in coming up with regulations that makes it so flexible that it's based on demand? Because the regulations, as we know in other countries, speaks to enforcement and control. What you're providing here is based on a demand. If you demand for something to be done differently, we could churn out a piece and possibly mainstream that across the country. That's basically what you're doing. So what's the mechanism that we could tailor and see how we can promote for other countries to adopt? Thank you.
So I think the first thing to maybe put that in context is, for many of these things, there were no legacy regulations. So I'll give you the example of mobile money, right? When mobile money was starting off in Nairobi and in Kenya, and it was time to create regulations, instead of the central bank just laying down what it thought the regulations would be, it consulted what was happening in Nairobi, it consulted Visa, and there were other partners. So the regulations, while there is a piece of enforcement, there's also a piece of co-creation, because at the end of the day, as government, you don't want to constrict innovation, and you don't want to confine the private sector when you're trying to spur private sector growth. So for a lot of the new technologies, what we've done is adopted a method of co-creation. So there's still some sort of protection. It was the same with off-grid energy and helping that take off. A lot of people were coming in and we were saying, fine, we also have plans to increase rural electrification. This is much cheaper than extending the grid, but let's work with you and we will put in, this is the quality we're expecting. And so we also forced some of the people who are coming in and said, you need to up your quality if you want to play in this market. So yes, we're co-creating with you, but we're still, the regulator is also still doing their job. In transportation, same thing, they have a sandbox environment. They will test with you, but while they also draft the regulations, you will be invited to participate in the regulatory framework. So we've tried to make sure it's as participatory as possible instead of just laying down the law. I think the beauty is in areas where there's no existing regulations, then it's easier to do it. And a lot of these regulations aren't things that are done by law. It's things that are done by the regulatory authority. Maybe they need to go to cabinet. Some of them don't even. So that's given us a flexibility. Yeah.
Thank you, Tessie.
Thank you.
So I'll invite Norbert at this point to give his presentation on Africa Digital Index.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So today it's my great honor to present the Africa Digital Index, which is the flagship project of my organization, Africa Gen. So to begin, I will start by introducing the organization. So Africa Gen was created last year in 2018. It was created by a group of Pan-African young people from Rwanda, Ethiopia, even outside the continent. We have a member from Jamaica. And what brought us together mostly is that we all met while studying in China, and we organized the African community there. So when we come back, we decided to continue our good practice and create a home-based organization to promote the digital economy. So our vision is really that we believe that Africa was there at the beginning and Africa will lead again the world, and our mission is to mobilize or galvanize 1 million Africans for the benefit of the continent. So you can see here the definition of the term Africa Gen. So the Gen represents two meanings. One is generation and the other one is the maker, from the Latin like oxygen and hydrogen. So we are not just the generation for Africa, but also the ones who are making Africa. So I'll go straight into the index itself. We believe that for the CFTA to reach its full potential, it is necessary to adopt different measures that enable an e-CFTA. That means an electronic CFTA. So some of the central questions that the African Digital Index is trying to solve are the following. Why and how industries and markets in Africa are being reshaped because of digital technologies. How should government and organizations respond to the increase in efficiency and the productivity? And how will they create new opportunities? And what is the future of work in Africa, in a place that is increasingly digitally redefined? And what are the challenges, opportunities, and new kinds of value created and captured in the digital economy? So our approach to create an African Digital Index, we have 8 categories. So I'm going to try and go through each one of them as fast as possible. So of course we start with with energy. So energy is really the backbone of the digital economy. Without energy, there is no digital economy at all. But it's also the first hurdle towards economic inclusion. So in Africa, where there is no electricity, that means there is no digital economy happening, or it's very little. So that has to be the first thing that countries have to tackle in order to bring their people towards the digital economy. The second is connectivity, and of course access to broadband is, I would say, the second step towards a digital economy. And in Africa, we define, I remember we defined the internet as a broadband on purpose. I heard once the story about President Kagame and Hamadoun Touré, who were trying to create the Africa Broadband Commission, and others were trying to call it the Africa Internet Commission so that they can reduce the amount of internet involved. So broadband is very important. The definition of what is internet is important. It has to be a broadband. The third category is the Human Capital Index, which measures the availability and quality of the skills needed to develop and maintain the different components of the digital economy. And the fourth, which is the most important, is measuring the consumption of online content by citizen. So we're talking about video, music, games, news, making video calls, online shopping, mobile money. So this is actually the most important category of all, which is really the result of the other categories. Citizens are the producers and consumers of products and services traded through the digital economy. So the fifth category is business digital integration. So this digital technology index, it measures the digitization of businesses and e-commerce. So this is not just about selling products online, but it's also about businesses using ERP and other technologies to be more efficient, human resources management. So this is really about efficiency and interoperability of African businesses. The sixth is the government digital integration. So we all know that government should move more towards digitization to better serve the public. As you have probably heard about Rwanda's Rwanda Online, or Irembo, which is the government services, the government portal for government digital services, which now covers about 90% of all the government services and allows for Rwandans to to get birth certificate, driving licenses, all of that without actually going to a government office. And so this has the consequence of reducing corruption, increasing efficiency, transparency, and reducing cost. So this also goes in the sense of what we heard yesterday about good governance. And number 7 is digital rights and policies and regulation. So this comes to inequality, the access of women, of other groups of people to digital economy is very important. And ADI will really review and address various digital challenges and opportunities as it relates to digital equality and justice. And this is something that is evolving. It's always changing. There's always new challenges. So in Africa, we need to stay on top of this topic, especially when you talk about data and privacy and things like that. And as data is the new oil, it's going to become increasingly important to have the right kind of policies and regulations in place to allow for the protection of data and equal access to internet. And last but not least is research and development. Use of technology for poverty mapping, artificial intelligence. R&D, research and development, is the source of power for all emerging economies, but it also signifies independence, security, and much more for Africa. So research and development as the foundation for technology and for independence in technology in Africa will be measured as well. So this is an interesting picture of where Africa is right now in terms of nighttime satellite image of Africa, which contrasted to the rest of the world shows there is not that much light happening. And this is a really good representation of the development of Africa. So on the right side, you have an artist's impression of where we could be in about 50 years when Africa has fully digitized. And you can see the vibrancy and you can see the network of what Africa could be. So Africa Gen is actually currently building the indexes for 3 countries, so Angola, Rwanda, and Senegal, as a benchmark. So that's where we're learning how to do it. And we're observing these countries over a period of 2 years, gathering data going back from 2016, 2017, 2018. And at the end of it, we'll have a very good image of not only the state of the digital economy in each individual country, but also the state of progress. So in my next part of this presentation, I want to talk about what technology can do. So I'm reminded what Dr. Obi told us yesterday, that we know that technology disrupts existing patterns. So if technology can disrupt existing patterns, then surely technology can also disrupt governance. So the way that we are approaching this to achieve this index, you have to keep in mind that other institutions that do this kind of index have a lot of money and a lot of power. So you think about World Economic Forum with the Global Competitiveness Index, or the World Bank with the Doing Business Report, or the Mo Ibrahim Foundation with the Governance Index, and many, many more. So we are a technology company at the core. So we are trying to solve this using technology more than using capital. So we took approach which what we call crowd first, or African crowd. So starting from mobilization, that's why we are here, you know, to partake in engage the tech and creative industry. And of course, we are building this index with SMEs in mind. That's what differentiates us from the World Economic Forum's index, which is as good and as beneficial as it has been for many countries, including Rwanda, in helping shape policies. It does not really promote the support of small or startups, of entrepreneurs, of SMEs. It is more about protecting the investment of big companies, which is not, the two are not contrary to each other. What ADI is trying to do is bring more to the front the issue of SMEs and African entrepreneurs in particular. So what we think we'll end up with is an index that actually serves the people, and an index that the SMEs can use to plan. So we're also using crowdsourcing as a way of gathering this index information. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard of a company called Ushahidi, based out of Kenya, that use SMS to gather information about all kinds of activities, and it's been even exported overseas. So we are testing these kinds of technologies using SMS, as well as using web-based services, for example, to measure the internet speed from different locations across Rwanda and across Angola. And of course, our infrastructure is native big data infrastructure. So it means it's 4th generation database that is ready for artificial intelligence. So it means that we end up with analytics and predictions in the future, and of course the ability to add artificial intelligence and machine learning. But we are also looking into different modes of financing for this index. So specifically using crowdfunding, we think that we can actually put a price on a category or on a specific measurement that allow African scientists to compete to fill in the information. This would really innovate the way that this kind of research is done, and allow for African scientists to get a secondary income. And of course, we think through this crowdfunding, we're going to be able to reach much more people and increase revenue for African scientists. So going forward, one of the most interesting use of this kind of data that we are gathering is actually the use of data for predicting or analyzing regions of poverty and informing policymakers into where to put the resources. So this has already been proven. We are not doing it yet, but this is where we want to go. That by using satellite data and using kind of imaging of access to electricity, you can really predict or see where the poverty level is in a specific country down to a specific village or even a specific street. So the digital economy is really a good representation of economic wealth. So we think that by analyzing the digital economy, where the money is moving from, where it is moving to, where the products are moving from and to, who has access to energy, who has access to broadband or to connectivity, it is a very good way to predict where there needs to be intervention in order to reduce poverty, or where there's growth that is significant that needs to be supported. So as you can see from this image here, this was done using machine learning. So by comparing daytime pictures of the continent with nighttime pictures of the continent, it is possible to determine the level of poverty or wealth of a certain region. So and because it is using machine learning, it is constantly improving and learning from its mistakes. So as the model continues to learn, it picks up whatever it associates with increasing light in the nighttime image and compares that to the daytime image of the same area, correlates its observation with data that is maybe from field surveyed area, and makes a judgment. So we believe this is a next generation of surveying and a very big cost-saving measure for African development policy. So in terms of progress for the ADI, we are currently in phase 1, and we're going to launch the index in March 2020 in Nairobi. And so far, we are piloting the 3 countries, which we think will be finishing by this end of this September, and then we're gonna go into get 10 countries. So we add 7 more countries between December and March, so that when we launch in March, we'll have a 20-country index. Sorry, a 10-country index. But we're also trying to really bring it down to the village level, so we can have a more visual index, so that entrepreneurs can, for example, if you are a logistic company and you want to find out where to invest in Rwanda, we can show you that these are the villages which have delivery services, and these are the villages which do not. So Rwanda has 15,000 villages. We are trying to get data on each one of them in terms of the 8 categories of index that we showed you. And going forward in phase 2, we think that by the end of December 2020, we'll be able to reach the 54 countries on the continent, and we're gonna have much more intuitive visual mapping and big data, of course. So I want to thank you for listening, and here you have my contact, and if anybody has any question, please go ahead.
Any questions?
Hi, thanks so much. So my question is relating to using data for poverty mapping. So now, I saw the picture you showed, and yeah, because it's from Stanford University that did the research. Now my question is, how do you plan to use African researchers to actually do this? Because based on my experience, some of their data was wrong. And so which means, how do you plan to collaborate with different African countries and researchers to have good data quality, data assurance, and making sure that the information you are getting is correct?
Yeah, so we are not we are not researchers ourselves, so we do not intend to do that. We using a partnership with Rwanda-based universities to achieve some level of scientific integrity. That doesn't answer your question. Maybe.
You're saying out you want to spread to different countries, right? And so my question is, how do you intend to partner with different, now let's say you're moving to Nigeria, how do you intend to partner with researchers from Nigeria, with experts in this field? I mean, I want to assume you don't want to use Rwandan researchers to, you know, work on stuff relating to Nigeria.
No, that's why we are taking it step-by-step approach. So we are working in Rwanda, Angola, and Senegal because we have members of our team who are based there who can initiate partnership with local universities who can help us to do that. And of course, we are also using crowdsourcing to identify. It's not always that you need to be a Nigerian researcher, in order to understand data from Nigeria. So there are some of the job which can be done by international or researchers from different areas of Africa. But we consider local partners as extremely important. That is why we do not intend to launch immediately with all the countries, is that we're going to go step by step. So my wish today is that maybe some of them from the countries that, some of you from the countries that we have not yet covered would come up and we can talk about how we can work together to add your country to the list.
So, brilliant work. My question is around you want to scale to 54 countries by the end of next year. Is that realistic? One. And what are your biggest needs right now? So this not the presentation is not just informational.
Right.
What exactly are your needs?
Yeah, 54 countries is our goal, so we have to do it as fast as possible. And we think that we can scale to do it by the end of next year. So we are confident that we can do it, because such an index is 2 or even 3 dimensional. So you can talk about just measuring the electricity coverage of Nigeria, for example, or 55 countries. This data is already available. We don't need to go and do the research on it. Same thing with connectivity. Most of the data is available. It's once you start going down, going into more depth of the data that you start getting problems. So if you want, for example, to really see which regions of Nigeria specifically has electricity, that's when the complexity comes. So is the second, or is the underlying level of complexity which makes it hard to reach 54 countries if you go all the potential of what the index can do. So we think we can definitely reach 54 countries even before March, but we won't have as good an index as it should be. So as we get better with with technology and with going into depth and going down from the country level to the state level to the municipality level, even down to the village or street level, is when it gets much more complicated. So to answer your second question, at this point we need 2 things above all, and one is partnerships, so we need more partners, and we need funding.
Any more questions, contribution?
So yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a very fascinating index and very needed. One of the things I would say is like some of the areas, I'm looking now for energy. In Ghana, we pride ourselves that we have a lot of energy, but still we had a word called dumso, where it's power on, power off. And even in the capital city, you could have that some parts will have power and others would not. So sometimes how you can measure availability might change week to week or month to month.
Right.
In the dry months when our power dam, our hydro dam has less water, then it's more likely you have these rolling blackouts. Although sometimes the capital will have power, but then other cities would not. So I also think for you to think about how dynamic or real time you want your index to be, or if you want it as like an average over a year for some of these figures. And then also some things like the government usage for E. In Ghana, like for now, the ports and harbors, they try to do like a digitalized service. So at least on that side, they're trying to move forward, but to open a company, you still have to go in person. So then the question is, would you have then several different indicators? So you have like for port and harbors, for open companies, for healthcare and so on and so forth. So you can almost have like a tick box across different countries, or how you will measure that aspect.
Yeah, great questions. So to answer the first question specifically, so we have 8 categories of indicators, but each category has many indicators. So for example, the electricity has 3 indicators. So one is electricity availability, the second is electricity usage, and the third is electricity reliability. So on the availability side is what is the percentage of the population that has access to electricity. So on the usage side, so that's where, for example, in Rwanda, you will see that we have a high percentage of availability of electricity, but we have a low usage of electricity. So it's how much quantity of electricity is used per capita per year. So, and then the third category is reliability, and that's when you look at how many days of power cuts per year. So by categorizing each index, each indicator in a very specific way, you can really have a good image of what the situation of electricity of a certain country is. So to answer your second question on government services, so we are learning from Rwanda. Rwanda has done a great job at not only having government services, but also having very, I would say, ambitious goals in one thing is citizen satisfaction. So you just measure it by how satisfied citizens are with the certain services. So this is not something that ADI is probably going to do ourselves. We're going to have to look at the country's use of services, but we hope that maybe partnering with those countries, we can encourage them to do surveys of what the citizen actually think of those services. So if, for example, in Rwanda, every year we have a survey of what people think of the Rwanda government e-services. So how many days did it take you to get the birth certificate? Did you have to submit anything that you had submitted before? So this is something that we're learning from Rwanda, and we think can apply to any other country.
My question is around data management. And so will this index look at the rate at which data is being hosted on the continent, and who has, for example, Microsoft and Huawei are all establishing large data centers on the continent. And so will you be looking at African institutions and businesses, and at what rate they're establishing indigenous data centers on the continent?
So for data, at this point, we are looking mostly at the policy. So each individual country, what are they doing, what have they put in place to protect the citizen data against abuse by these big companies. So often when you see in some countries, like you say Microsoft, Huawei, Facebook, are building data centers or using local data centers, it is more often because of the requirement of the local company, or the government, local government or institutions that ask them to do this in order to have the data on the ground. So we are not going to look into individual companies like Huawei and what they're doing in Africa, but we're going to look at the African countries, how they're reacting to how the data of the citizen is being used. But we think this question is actually very, very crucial, and we haven't figured it out yet. So we're trying to get you know, and better understanding by, you know, participating at events like this and doing research on what is the future of data for the Africans, because there is so much of our data which is being utilized for the benefit of others. For example, you know, Facebook and is learning so much by using artificial intelligence on the data of African people, and WhatsApp is doing the same as well, and all these companies, Google, but what is the benefit for it for the African? So then that brings up the actual, you know, the futuristic questions, you know, who owns the data? You know, should you own the data if your data is being used and you're getting a service for free? Are you really getting a service for free, or are you know, being abused by a company that is taking profits from you? So this is a question that we haven't figured out, and we hope to find answers with others. And we think it's actually a question for our generation to figure out how we're going to do, what are we going to do about data? Because data has become more valuable than petrol. So it is literally the new oil. But I don't think we have figured out collectively what are we going to do with it.
Thank you, Norbert.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
So at this point, we're going to break up into various subgroups like we did yesterday to have a co-creation workshop. And for today, the 4 groups that we'll be having will be the digital economy, creative economy, trade and facilitation, information and business support networks. So the subgroup heads for digital economy is Norbert. For creative economy, that's Ojoma. For trade facilitation, that's Simeon, and for information and business support network, it will be Inyi. So we're breaking up into the various co-creation workshops, and when we're done, like yesterday, we'll come back into plenary and share our findings. And so we'll do this up until lunchtime. So creative economy is meeting in the Kachiru room.
Information and business. Information and business. Where do we meet?
And you can choose.
I need to use the screen because we're working on the spreadsheet. Some of what we have are handouts in the spreadsheet.
So you mean that you're going to be projecting from, you're going to
Not
be
project, but for the purpose of everyone seeing the same page.
so is this something you're working on and you want to project? So you will need a computer, but then we need to connect it to the screen so that people can see.
Yes, a computer we could connect.
Yes.
We need to connect it to that.
Okay, so I'll just get my colleague Wale now. Wale. So, where is Simeon? Connect his computer.
Okay.
So that
we can't. Like we have to
that shit.
Okay, can you use that screen?
Okay. So I just told him you explain it to him.
I have a question actually. So yesterday I came later, I had to leave early. I'm not sure what group I would actually be in.
So which would you prefer for today's session?
The international trade one.
The trade one?
Yeah.
Okay, so Simeon, the guy wearing the black shirt, is the subgroup head.
Okay.
So once you just see them settling now, I think they're still trying to choose the
Where
location.
they?
Exactly.
Okay, all right, I'll just keep an eye on it.
So digital economy,